forgotten films found in archives and attics show life lived in color in the Second World War. Voices of the past, drawn from letters and diaries, tell the stories of those who lived through it. Together, they reveal a world that has never been seen until now. Every day, a steady stream of supplies leaves a busy Halifax harbor. The shipments are bound for Britain and contain oil, food, and industrial goods. Without the successful flow of these essential supplies, the war simply cannot be won. Everything possible is done to protect this valuable cargo so that it can reach the Allies overseas. For that reason, the Halifax Naval Base in Nova Scotia is the first military establishment in North America to be protected by radar. Quebec's Paul-Émile-Lapointe.
We are called to the deck. My heart comes up in my throat. It's departure. I spoke to the Holy Virgin and it gave me courage.
Out on the open sea, German U-boats, invisible from the surface, threaten every shipment. Between September 1939 and May 1945, more than 2,000 Allied ships and 40,000 seamen are lost in the North Atlantic. On board Royal Canadian Navy corvette HMCS Kamsack is 20-year-old Winnipeg native Frank Curry.
Another day of taking our large convoy a little further on their long and perilous journey to far distant ports. Loaded down with every type of war material and food, planes piled high on their decks and deep in the water with their valuable cargoes. No sign of submarines in our particular vicinity, but one never knows when the unexpected will bring disaster to our group.
On a quiet July morning, a Hollywood film crew shooting a war film aboard HMCS Restigouche finds itself in the middle of a real German attack. As high above, the Luftwaffe let loose a volley. Someone from the film crew captures the events on his own camera. The Canadian warship returns fire and lays a smokescreen. After a brief skirmish that feels like a lifetime, the Restigouche, her crew, and the Hollywood filmmakers all escape untouched. The Restigouche, nicknamed Rusty Guts, would go on to see many more brave escort and rescue operations throughout the remainder of the war. In Brantford, Ontario, the Dufferin and Haldeman Rifles get set to leave for Canada's west coast. For these Brantford boys, some of whom have never stepped outside their hometown, Nanaimo promises to be as exotic as the moon. On every stop along the way, the men leave their train cars to get exercise and to drum up war support from those who come out to greet them at the stations.
Perhaps your home is near an army camp, and perhaps during the past 3 years you have seen platoon after platoon of soldiers in training pass your house, kicking up dust in the summer, tramping down the snow in winter. These men are not just marching for exercise. They're not just walking to get used to it. There are other equally important things to be learned when the Canadian soldier goes on route march.
You for the Norman walk will heal man. Great strong huskies up and heelin' on, hard working, hairy-legged heelin' on, snake the more Glen Warble.
The Dufferin and Haldeman rifles have been sent to train on the rugged ground of Nanaimo because Canada is concerned that Japanese aggression, already consuming much of China, will eventually expand to the shores of Western Canada. In the cool, remote forests of Vancouver Island, the Dufferin and Haldeman rifles get their first taste of what ground battle with Japanese invaders would feel like. Fear of Japanese attack proves more than justified when Japan bombs Pearl Harbor less than 5 months later. In the same month, they overrun Hong Kong, killing or wounding some 800 Canadian soldiers of the nearly 2,000 sent there to bolster defenses. The remainder are taken prisoner. Japanese forces have been pounding away at China since 1937. The population is bloodied and tattered. Amidst that violence, the people of China receive assistance from Canada's Quakers. The Quakers, staunchly anti-violent and conscientious objectors, choose to help out the victims of war by driving ambulances, distributing medical supplies, and providing doctors, nurses, and technicians to understaffed Chinese hospitals. One of these is Dr. Albert Dorland from the Friends Ambulance Unit.
It's rather amusing to find just how well we pacifists get along with the Army in the field. I'm afraid that some of the civilians at home, who are so critical and antagonistic towards our views, would be greatly annoyed by it all. I find that the ambulance unit has a great reputation in China, and of all the Army chaps I have met, from GIs to colonels, they would all go out of their way to help us when they can, giving us rides in Army trucks, lifts around by plane, the use of camp facilities, in order that we may carry on our jobs.
Because of Japanese aggression in China and in the Pacific, Canada's Japanese-Canadian population is suddenly suspect.
With war in the Pacific now a reality, it came to acute nationwide attention that Canada had 23,000 residents of Japanese racial descent. It was well known that a large group of these people was engaged in the fishing industry on the West Coast. But the outbreak of war brought to new prominence the fact that practically all of the 23,000 lived, worked, and had their small businesses inside the Western No. 1 defense zone.
Bowing to public pressure, Prime Minister Mackenzie King moves most of Canada's Japanese-Canadian population into 8 relocation camps in British Columbia's interior. They spend the war in cramped compounds with names like Rosemary, Lemon Creek, and Greenwood. Their homes and property are confiscated and sold.
Dear sirs, I have recently been advised that you sold my farmland. I should like to point out to you that the alleged transfer of this property was made without any consultation to me and without my consent. I am an ex-serviceman, having served in the Canadian Expeditionary Forces in the last Great War. I am yours truly, Z. Inoue.
Muriel Kitagawa, a Canadian-born woman of Japanese descent, writes to her brother.
Dear Wes, Lord, if this was Germany, you can expect such things as the normal way. But this is Canada, a democracy. Pray for us all. Your sister Muriel.
Concerns over the security of Canada escalate as Japanese hostilities in the Pacific inch ever closer to North America. By June 1942, Japan has taken over Kiska and Attu, 2 islands off the coast of Alaska. Isolated and vulnerable, Alaska needs essential military supplies and reinforcements if it is to be defended. To transport these supplies and reinforcements, the U.S., with Canada's agreement, begins construction on a highway linking Dawson Creek, British Columbia, to Fairbanks, Alaska.
Sergeant Troy Heiss, Unit 477th Quartermaster, Trucking Arrangement. The Alaska Highway, winding in and winding out, fills my mind with serious doubt as to whether the lout who planned this route was going to hell or coming out.
Nearly 20,000 American Army personnel and civilians slash their way through 2,500 kilometers of virgin northern forest, roughly the same distance as Winnipeg to Montreal.
Sid Navertil, 648th Topographic Battalion of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. More men have gone in with yellow jaundice, and a few are wandering in the woods lost. God, how I'd hate to be alone in this wilderness.
Private Harry H. Spiegel, 648th Topographic Battalion. In spite of the cold nights, with a good roaring fire, thick soft mat of spruce boughs to lay out our fart sacks on, and covered by our shelter canvases, we slept comfortably. There must be a lot of bears, for so many of the trees have claw marks on their trunks.
Under the worst possible conditions, the Alaska Highway is completed in just 8 months. In the majestic mountains of British Columbia, the Rocky Mountain Rangers, an infantry regiment, make their way down a winding dirt road. They come across a remote camp where a large group of Nazis appear to be stationed. With Canada's attention focused on a Japanese invasion, has the Third Reich managed to invade the country? The German troops are in fact other Rocky Mountain Rangers playing Nazis in the Hollywood film Commandos Strike at Dawn, starring Lillian Gish. The performance of the Rocky Mountain Rangers receives glowing reviews.
Monthly Film Bulletin. The enthusiasm and vigor of a force of Canadian troops in the commando battle scenes contributes in no small measure to their verisimilitude.
Less than 900 kilometers south in Montana, a more serious U.S.-Canada joint effort is underway. The 1st Special Service Force, later dubbed the Devil's Brigade. Made up of men from both sides of the border, the Special Elite Force undergoes a rigorous training program. Since parachute helmets are not yet available, the men use football helmets. One of the trainees is Toronto's Tom O'Brien.
Hi, Dad. Arrived here today at noon. Everything fine and dandy. So far, this army is about 20 years ahead of the Canadian one. If I ever succeed in getting through this course, Dad, I'll be the toughest hombre this side of Toronto, as they teach you every way to fight here, and the Marquis of Queensberry rules mean nothing. Our CO tells us the commandos are sissies compared to the paratroops. My best to you and the folks. Tom. Hi, Dad. Everything okay here so far, but what a stiff training grind. From 9 until 10, drilled with 2 chutes from what are called mock-up planes. They are just replicas of planes that are jumped from with the doors off. You know, Pop, when I was up there today and looking out that door with a 1,000-foot drop, I'm not saying a word. I don't know whether I will jump or not. I will either be a jumper or not by the time you receive this. Best regards, Tom.
In August 1943, the 1st Special Service Force, along with the 13th Canadian Infantry Brigade and other American troops, put their training to the test as they move in on Japanese forces occupying the island of Kiska off the coast of Alaska. Nearly 30,000 U.S. soldiers and 5,300 Canadians, all wearing the same uniforms, are set for the showdown on Kiska. But on landing, the troops find the island blanketed in a thick, heavy fog. The men can barely see a meter in front of them. In the confusion, 20 Americans and 4 Canadians are accidentally killed by their own troops. The loss of lives is made all the more tragic by the discovery that the Japanese have already left the island. With the constant worry of loved ones living or serving overseas, some snatch a few precious hours of escape at Toronto's Canadian National Exhibition. But even here, amongst the whir of Ferris wheels and the sweet scent of cotton candy, it is impossible to forget the war. On CNE grounds, Canada shows off its growing production of war machines destined for the battlefields of Europe. As well as troop carriers, the war desperately needs shipments of blood to tend to its growing list of wounded. In Montreal, furniture salesman Percy Jacobson pays a visit to something that didn't exist in the last war: blood donor clinics.
Anything out of routine pleases me. Today I went again to the blood donor clinic and was delighted to find that I was able to donate 300 cc's. Last time I was only good for 180, which was disappointing, because it was hardly worth the trouble. Did not fare well at that time, and the doctor suggested that I hold off for a while. However, today I feel fine. I really enjoyed the experience. There was good coffee for the donors and excellent donuts.
Percy Jacobson can only hope that his son Joe, serving overseas, will not need his donation. Over the course of the war, Canadian blood donor clinics send more than 2.5 million bottles of blood overseas. For many women, taking care of the family while dad's away at war is a full-time job. Still, they manage to free up enough time to contribute to the war effort in other ways. For women and retirees, Salvation Army centers provide plenty of opportunities for them to put their domestic skills to good use. But it's going to take a lot more than sewing and knitting to win the war, and tens of thousands of women grab jobs in war factories.
Susan Danford, Montreal. Cam, darling, I told you about my raise in yesterday's letter. 125 smackers sounds a lot, but with taxes deducted, my pay won't be nearly as impressive. However, I'm very pleased with the raise and will be contented for a while. For a few days last week, I was contemplating quitting because the noise was getting me down. But for 125, minus taxes, I'll stick it out. All my love, always, your Sue.
Hundreds of war factories once humming with the production of cars, ovens, and baby carriages now produce only what can be used to win the war. The conditions are so unglamorous that Canada's new factory workers need to be reminded to be women.
Dandruff is a very common complaint and is one result of neglecting the hair. Wash your hair well every 2 or 3 weeks. Rinse the hair thoroughly to remove all traces of soap. Comb the hair well every day.
In Manitoba, as well as producing bombs, uniforms, airplanes, and other war supplies, workers pump out spork, a canned processed meat destined for the mess tables of those serving overseas. Gunda Lampton, a recent arrival to Canada and now a worker at the Inglis plant in Toronto, writes in her diary.
The whole factory is brilliantly lit, and the loudspeaker near the ceiling trumpets popular music in March time to keep us awake. Over-awake. Overtired, I am near hallucinating on those dark mornings when we leave the factory before sunrise.
If women working in factories is an odd sight to some Canadians, their joining the military is nothing short of revolutionary.
Mary Hawkins Bush, RCAF. There certainly have never been prouder, happier girls than we are. The fact that Canada thinks we're useful enough to send to England really thrills me. I still don't know what I've done to deserve this break, when there are so many others who have been wanting to go for so long. Did I tell you what I did when I heard the news? I was sewing my props badges on one of my uniforms and trying to be cool. I had sewed right through both sleeves and couldn't put my arms into my tunic.
This is the CBC reporting from London, and the speaker you're to hear is Marietta McPherson, managing editor of the Canadian woman's magazine Chatelaine. And her special interest is the work and welfare of the Canadian girls serving overseas with the armed forces.
I don't know a thing about all the intricate machinery of Air Force operations or cipher rooms or military transport, but I do know a cheerful Canadian girl when I see one. In the past few weeks, I've been seeing hundreds of them. You people at home can be proud of them. They're doing an essential job in this war. In many cases, a monotonous and tiring job, but with the same fine spirit and devotion to duty that our men are displaying.
Mary Hawkins Bush, RCAF. Our flight lectures are most interesting. We had an address from a flight sergeant yesterday on the care of the hairstyles and treatment thereof. Another lecture was on etiquette and bearing. A third, on firefighting and the use of implements, how to act and when. Still another was on the equivalent ranks of the Army, Air Force, and Navy. The Padre spoke today on morals and religion, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Flight Officer James Baker, RCAF. Dear Mom and Dad, I don't know why it is, but squadron life seems to loosen something up inside you, and you begin to enjoy life far more than you ever dreamed you could. Anyway, I had a wonderful time last night. I jitterbugged until I was ready to drop. I met a girl. She was definitely a gem type, as we say. I really never knew girls till just lately, you know, but I'm learning more and more what wonderful creatures they are. Love to all, as always, Jim.
The closeness between the sexes is seen as a less than ideal situation for Canada's upstanding young men and women, and the military is quick to offer up a little sex education.
It is important that you should all know about venereal disease. You should also realize that the war has brought about many changes in your way of life. The uncertainty about the future, the separation from home, the frequent moving from place to place, and the many new acquaintances, both male and female, all tend to make you somewhat confused. Some of you may think that alcohol helps to smooth out this confusion. Therein lies a danger, because it is often under the influence of alcohol, without your intending it, that you may expose yourself to infection. Moreover, don't forget that it's just as important to be free from venereal disease after the war as during it. You will all have earned the right, and will all want to take your place in normal civilian life. Many of you will want to get married and have a home and family of your own. Whatever you do, whether it's during the war or in the reconstruction of things after the war, you can play your part best if you are free from disease and in perfect health.
But not everyone has forgotten a promise made to a sweetheart, and for those, the heart grows ever fonder. Home movie cameras and letters become a way of preserving moments lived apart. For her husband, John, Elizabeth Branton presses these images between the sheets of time.
Hello, my darling. I was so lonesome for you today that the tears kept coming into my eyes. I think it was that I was seeing so many sailors. It was a time when they were changing classes and there were scores of uniforms dashing around. Pooh kept looking around, and I'm sure he was thinking of you. Love, Lisa.
My own dear wife, how I wish that I could just call you up and hear your voice reply. When I see a long lock spread out in the distance with hills beyond that fade into the mist of the gray evening sky, just showing a faint outline of their contour, then, my love, I think most of you, and we talk together about the beauty of everything.
Ice blockage and the threat of German submarines in the Gulf of St. Lawrence have made it increasingly difficult to get oil into Canada to run its munitions factories. In the steep, rugged gorges of New Hampshire and the granite ridges of Maine, a solution is found. Construction crews run a pipeline 450 kilometers overland from Portland, Maine to Montreal, Quebec. Every day, the pipeline pumps lifeblood into Montreal's factories, Canada's industrial center. Keeping war plants running draws thousands of new workers to Canada's cities. More than 1 million men and women, 10% of Canada's population, work in these factories. The flood of bodies means there is not enough living space. In some places, apartments are rented for 8-hour periods, the length of a work shift. To deal with the crisis, the Wartime Housing Office builds housing communities in towns across Canada. Prefab houses are built in 8 hours at the cost of $2,800. Because the oceans of the world have been turned into battlefields, products such as gasoline, rubber, and steel are in short supply. Canadians are forced to cut back on the use of their beloved automobiles.
Mrs. R. Ridge, Toronto, Ontario. I hear we lose our gas coupon soon. I will be sorry to see that happen, as we will have quite a walk to streetcars, and my hubby says when he gets to them, it's not worth a ticket from there to his work. So he wants to walk, but it's too hard on him when he's on his feet all day. Still, if it's going to win the war, we will gladly do our share or die in the attempt.
The shortage of raw materials results in salvage drives around the country. Old tires are collected for war use. Fat and bones are needed to make bombs and explosives.
The housewife does her bit.
We're saving our old bottles. We're saving our old bags. We're saving our old rubbers and our old worn-out rags. We're saving our old leather gloves to make the sailor's vest. We must not waste old woolens. We must save each scrap of waste. We housewives never waste a scrap, save everything in sight. And now we save most everything. We're saving the daylight.
Food is also scarce, and Canadians must ration what they have.
Helen Lambert. Nearly everything is hard to get now. It's almost impossible to buy firewood, even in this country. Honey is hard to get. Very few stores have any jam on their shelves. Biscuits in a big A&P store last Saturday just didn't exist. I asked the man. He laughed at me. "You'll have to come on Thursdays if you want biscuits, lady."
Don't overheat your iron. Save electricity. The nearby plane factory needs that waste power.
Ontario families unknowingly may help the enemy by the unnecessary use of electricity. But if you regroup the furniture in your living room, you can make one lamp do the work of 3.
Mrs. R. Ridge, Toronto, Ontario. It's really maddening to hear some people grousing. You'd think they were going to starve. Some of them should for a while. I better not start or you'll hand me a soapbox, but it does make you mad when the least thing they are asked to give up hurts some people so much.
Twice a year, victory bond drives are held across Canada, and everyone is asked to give generously by buying war bonds. Over the course of the war, victory drives raised $8.8 billion, roughly $800 from every man, woman, and child in Canada. In Ferry, Ontario, Navy cadets raise money to buy a brand new Corvette for the service. In Quebec, too, there is generous support for the bond drives. It is clear that while French Canadians are anti-conscription, they are not necessarily against the war. Cardinal Rodrigue Villeneuve, Archbishop of Quebec.
I do not hesitate in encouraging you, in as much as I am able, to do your part in the victory drives. Contributions are the nerve center of the war and will help fulfill the promise of a safer tomorrow beyond the war.
But for Montreal office furniture salesman Percy Jacobson, whose own son Joe is serving in the Air Force, these generous contributions to the war effort are undercut by the harsh views of some on the issue of conscription.
A man named Pisanot told my partner that he was not going to vote affirmative to the plebiscite because those Jews were not doing anything in the war. This, of course, is a lie. Recent statistics show the number of Jews in the Air Force, the most dangerous of the fighting forces, is greater in proportion to our population than the other groups. Sometimes I get sick to the heart with all this hatred. French against English, English and French against the Jew.
On April 27, 1942, Canadians from British Columbia to Cape Breton are asked to vote on whether or not the government should send home defense conscripts overseas. 80% of French Canadians vote no. Up to 80% of Canada's Anglophones vote yes. The result only widens the breach between French and English Canada. News of the national vote on conscription makes its way across the rolling hills of the English countryside and reaches the camp of the 48th Highlanders of Canada. Toronto's Geordie Beale writes to his sister with strict orders for their brothers still serving in Canada.
I want you to impress upon him that it is all right to train and get into shape for Home Guard work, but that is to be all. Our country's politicians haven't guts enough to conscript the right men, and the result is that there are too many soldiers overage now in the army. He is 36 years old, and God knows how many thousands of others are in Canada still of military age. I left him back home to take care of the home front. Don't forget to let him know how I feel about it, and it is the feeling of 90% of the lads overseas.
As Lieutenant Geordie Beale considers the manpower situation in Canada, a military disaster is brewing. On the grounds of a camp in England, the Calgary Regiment is inspected before it prepares to play an ill-fated role in a raid on the German-occupied town of Dieppe, France. None of the men standing on the field knows how badly the operation has been planned. None has the slightest idea that in a one-day raid, more than 800 Canadian soldiers will die, Canada's worst single-day loss of the war.
King's Own Calgary Regiment. Dear Dad, by the time this note reaches you, the Dieppe raid will have been forgotten by most people, but we never shall. The scars will be livid in prairie towns for generations to come. In a previous letter, I mentioned a lad who's engaged to a young lady, living over Mrs. Stewart's old store. Well, poor Tanner didn't make the trip home. And if you think it might help a little, you might tell her she picked a real man. Yours as ever, Grant.
The Royal Air Force Ferry Command is to the skies what the convoys are to the seas. Their mission is to get warplanes from North America to the places where Allied forces are fighting. To make it on the fuel they carry, planes are stripped down and operate without armament, heat, or radar navigation. In November 1942, the Ferry Command flies planes to French North Africa, where Operation Torch, the Anglo-American invasion of Morocco and Algeria, has opened up a new front in the Desert War. One of those in North Africa is Saint-Éleuthère, Quebec's Paul-Émile-Lapointe.
You might be interested to learn that I visited most of Africa. Firstly, I crossed its width in a fighter, a wonderful voyage. I came across everything, jungle, desert, etc. I also flew near the Red Sea and I went down the Nile to Cairo. I saw the tombs of the kings of Egypt and the famous pyramids.
Canadian boys raised on pond hockey and shoveling driveways now find themselves knee-deep in sand dunes and camel dung.
Sergeant Pilot Paul-Émile-Lapointe, RCAF, Egypt. I haven't been able to enjoy the coming of spring. All that I have here is the sand which infiltrates itself everywhere, and the flies which have no respect for human beings. Flying my Spitfire is by far my favorite pastime.
Sergeant George McCool, RCAF, Egypt. Dear Mom and Dad, I met a gunner from Ottawa who came over on the boat with me, and did we get drunk. It was my first drunk in Egypt. I have laid off the beer because it makes me sweat. George.
The fight for control of North Africa is a fight for the control of the southern Mediterranean basin, an important gateway to Europe and to the Nazis. Ultimately, the battle for control of North Africa is successful, as described by Canada's Lorne Green.
Tonight the Union Jack and the Stars and Stripes are flying over the smoking cities of Tunis and Bizerte. Axis defenses collapsed after a tremendous 36-hour offensive by the American Corps and the British First Army. During the day, the Americans advanced 9 miles, the British 14. The combined Anglo-American offensive was so perfectly timed that the two cities fell within 5
Allied control of North Africa would soon lead to Canada's first sustained military campaign of the war, through Sicily and up the boot of Italy. North Africa isn't the only exotic locale where Canadian servicemen are found. In late 1942, many Canadians serving in Royal Air Force squadrons are sent to protect India, the jewel in the British crown, from the Japanese. Sandy House of Ontario brings home these films of his travels. Norman Rabkin, a Toronto native, captures his observations in letters written home.
Dear Yank, I happen to be as far away from home as possible. It is not bad in India, but you certainly gain some new experiences by seeing the East. This is a photographer's paradise, with women carrying everything on their heads. Men walk around with tie shirts hanging out and oxen used instead of horses. Conditions for the common people are very low. Big families live in 1 or 2 small rooms with no running water and live on rice. As for me, I'm feeling fine and making the best of things. Beer is almost unobtainable, and as for women, that is out. Best regards, Norman.
Johnny Johnson, fresh from his air training in Ontario, also finds himself in Southeast Asia. For a boy from Toronto's beaches, the scenery is nothing short of dazzling.
My dearest Sonia, I have a few minutes to spare, so I thought I'd drop you a line to let you know that I'm still thinking of you and loving you as always. There isn't much more, but I guess I can fill up space by telling you how and what we live in. Our home is a nice clay hut with a cement floor and a straw roof. The lizards keep them quite free from insects. I haven't got around to giving all my lizards names yet. I can't tell you where I'm situated, but it's miles from anywhere. I don't like to throw wet blankets about, but it looks as though it will be years before I get home. I miss you terribly lately, darling. All I am living for is to finish this damn war and get back and start life. With you, loving you as always, your own, Johnny. October 11th, 1944. Dearest Sonia, I'll be home by next summer for sure. I don't think I told you about my new kite. Yep, about 3 weeks ago they gave me a brand new kite. It's got all the latest gadgets and is a charm on the controls. Nobody flies her but me, and do I ever baby it. That's all the news. Adios. All my love, Johnny.
Soon after writing his letter to Sonia, Johnny Johnson crashes his plane on the southwest coast of Burma. Even though he's reported missing, Sonia continues to write.
At last it has come. You were reported missing today. I can't and I won't believe it because I can see you so clearly with me in the years to come. I can picture us from the very moment you step off the train and are home again. Our own home, just us. It must be in the country. You, the prosperous businessman, and I will keep house. There's nothing I would like better and would give anything to be doing it right now. Your picture is before me now, the one taken at St. Eugene. It's just you, the way I picture you every day. The freckles, the dimples, and that little gleam in your eye. Your helmet pushed back, the maps stuck in your pocket, all ready to step into the plane and up into the blue. Loving you forever, Sonia.
Johnny Johnson's body is never recovered.